What I'm about to recount happened to me back in 2022 when I was 24 years old. For context, I'm non binary, although I was assigned female at birth and I present very feminine. At the time, I was studying in Paris and renting a room for my boyfriend's mom in a town a little over an hour outside the city, about 20 minutes from Versailles. It was winter break, and I'd planned to meet a longtime internet friend in Paris for the very first time. She ended up being a toxic person, but that's for another story. Now, I'm pretty petite due to a lifelong eating disorder, and I've always looked much younger than my age. Even now, I still get carded for alcohol. On the day of the meetup, I wore a skirt and dressed casually. We had a good time out, but because I live so far away, I knew that I needed to leave well before I would have liked to. After 10 p.m. out here, public transit thins out fast, and I knew that I needed almost 2 hours of travel to get back. I didn't end up leaving quite early enough, though. I caught a train as far as Versailles, but then I had almost an hour to wait for the bus to a nearby town where my boyfriend would pick me up. Outside the train station, a group of bus drivers were smoking and chatting. I walked over and asked which bus went to my stop. A small man with gray hair, maybe late 40s or early 50s, said that it was his route, and he glanced at my skirt and commented that I must be freezing. And then he offered to let me wait inside the bus in order to warm up. I was cold and I appreciated the gesture, so I agreed. He led me toward a bus parked in a very dark corner of the lot. No lights, no people. As we walked, this man stood just a little too close and started asking some pretty personal questions. Where I lived, where I was headed, what I was studying, if anyone was waiting for me tonight. His tone felt overly familiar too, like in his mind we had spoken before. My instincts were screaming at me to be careful with this man, but I've always been polite and a people pleaser, so I gave vague answers, even through all my discomfort, and I followed him to the bus. He opened the bus door and motioned me to get on. I had this nervous reaction shoot through my body, and it told me not to go inside. But because I was cold and because it was late, I ignored it and stepped in anyway, sitting at the front of the bus where there was still a sliver of light. For even more information about me, I'm black, and in the dark, you wouldn't have seen me easily, other than the drivers who watched me leave with him. No other person knew that I was in that bus. Things got stranger nearly immediately. He flicked his cigarette away, climbed in the bus behind me, and started talking about the bus itself, how it had been designed to transport the French football team, how there was a big table, and even a bathroom in the back. Twice he suggested that I come to the back of the bus with him. There were no lights back there, and I wasn't interested in what he was trying to show me. So I wasn't going to follow him back there. I pulled out my phone, texted my boyfriend, weird bus driver, call me ASAP. I ignored the driver's ramblings and stared at my screen, hoping that a call would come through. He moved to the aisle and stood between me and the door, still talking about random things that I don't even remember. His eyes kept flicking from my phone down to my knees and thighs. At this point, I was all but praying that my boyfriend's call came through. When his name finally lit up my screen, I felt a rush of relief. The driver must have seen the photo of him on my screen because he suddenly stepped back and said he was going outside to smoke another cigarette before we left. I answered the call and whispered everything that was happening, all while keeping an eye on this man through the window. When he walked far enough away, I was ready to bail on this bus ride. I got up and made my way to the door, and that's when I discovered that he had closed the door behind him and it was now locked. So in effect, I was trapped on this bus. Still on the phone, I went back to my seat and through the window I saw the driver coming back. I think he saw me talking on the phone, and that's when he turned and walked away again for whatever reason, locking the bus behind him one more time. He did this back and forth routine 3 different times, and each time he locked me inside before walking off. The last time he stayed near the bus, so eventually I hung up and started texting my boyfriend instead. I shifted seats to watch him more easily. That's when I saw an older woman approach and ask him if this bus was going to the very stop that I asked about. He flat out lied to her, saying that another bus would. I started frantically texting my boyfriend that I was going to die. I was convinced that this driver was going to do something terrible and then dumped my body on the side of the road. That's when the driver came back inside again and locked the door behind him. According to the schedule, we were supposed to be leaving in 2 to 3 minutes. At this point, something inside of me snapped. I didn't want to be on this bus with him. I stood up, trying to keep my voice calm without shaking, and told him that I needed to run back to the station to use the restroom. He told me there was a bathroom on the bus. I lied again, saying I needed snacks from the vending machine. He hesitated as he was staring through me, but he eventually agreed, although not before he twice pretended that the door button wasn't working. At that point, I pretty much just dropped the act. I told him if he didn't open the door right then, that I'd grab the emergency hammer and break the window. Well, suddenly to my surprise, that button worked. I bolted out of the bus and into the freezing night air, breathing like I'd just escaped a prison cell. I ran back toward the station and I positioned my body hiding behind a vending machine before finally bursting into tears. My boyfriend called back and said that he'd reached out to his sister who lived in Versailles. Her boyfriend was on his way to come get me. While I was trying to calm down, I saw the bus driver now walking through the station. He was looking around like he was searching for something, although more likely someone. I held my breath until he left, and in that moment, it hit me fully. This guy was searching for me like I was his prey, and I knew then that my instincts about him had been right. Eventually, my boyfriend's sister's boyfriend arrived and took me home. I couldn't sleep that night or for many nights after, not sure if it was because of the adrenaline or just my insomnia had gotten worse. I filed a report with the bus company, but in their one and only response to me, all I learned was that he wasn't one of their regular drivers, so in essence, nothing was done. I'm grateful to the people who helped me that night, but I also learned a hard lesson. You have to trust your instincts. If someone makes you feel uncomfortable, unsafe, or uneasy, you don't owe them politeness. Get out, make noise, break a window if you have to. It's far better to seem rude than to end up as a story on the news. When I was younger, like around the age of 13 or 14, I was invited to go on a camping trip with my best friend Pat, along with his dad and his uncles. It was this kind of guy's weekend, a coming of age thing, something I'd like to do with my kids now, fishing, cooking over fires, our first couple of beers together, sleeping in tents out in the wilderness and all the stuff like that. We drove pretty far up north, but 18 years after the fact, I can't really remember exactly where we went. I know it was about 2 hours north of where I live now. We'd parked Pat's dad's truck off the side of the road in a bush and canoed a pretty far distance down a river to a lake before setting up our camp at the edge of the water. Right across the water, we could see this really old, abandoned-looking cabin. On the outside, it looked decrepit, rotting almost. The roof was sagging and all the bushes were growing up around it as if nature was trying to reclaim it. At one point, Pat's dad and his uncles were fishing and drinking, and they allowed us to go off adventuring a bit. Surprisingly, they actually let us take one of the canoes across the water to check out this abandoned cabin. Thinking about it through my own lens, I don't think there's any chance I would let my own sons go that far off to a point where I couldn't reach them in an emergency. But Pat's dad and uncles were drunk, so being 13-ish-year-old boys, we did exactly what we wanted to do. We paddled across, checked it out. On the outside, the thing looked super wrecked. The front door was unlocked and we found ourselves inside. This was a mistake. On the inside, it was most certainly not abandoned and very much lived in. It really freaked us out knowing that somebody lived there, but it was obvious that whoever this was, they were nowhere nearby. There were porn magazines spread across the table, a bong, a tray full of weed, and beer bottles everywhere. On one of the shelves in the living room, there were 2 hunting shotguns. I know it was dumb to play with them, but we did. We never pulled the trigger, just walked around the house with them like idiots feeling cool. We checked out all the rooms in the house, but one really creeped us out. And yeah, I understand that we technically committed a breaking and entering, or a trespass at the very least, but we honestly thought it was abandoned before we got inside. Once we were in, we figured it was somebody's hangout or something like that, even though it was pretty deep out in the woods. Anyway, the room in question had those mannequins that you see in clothing stores, but none of them were wearing any clothes. They all had on different wigs, different lengths, different colors. I'm sure I don't have to explain just how off it would make you feel if you walked into a room that's dedicated to about a dozen mannequins. At that point, we decided that we'd had enough and we made our exit after putting the guns back where we found them. After canoeing back to our campsite, we told Pat's dad everything. He was almost as stunned as we were, and if I'm being honest, I think it kind of set in right then and there that he shouldn't have let us go off on our own. Well, that evening we fished a little bit more, and Pat caught a fish that his dad cooked over the fire. While we were eating dinner, 2 guys came by in a motorboat and stopped off at our site. And these guys were friendly enough. We all joked around a bit, and we had just assumed that they were other campers or people out fishing like us, but then they invited us to their cabin just across the water to hang out. Pat's dad politely declined, although these men still lingered, and that's when things started to feel a bit weird. The 2 guys were drinking quite a lot and exchanging weird looks with each other. At one point, they even asked Pat and I if just the 2 of us would go hang out with them. Pat's dad gave them a stern no, and things only grew more awkward around the campfire. They stayed a while until it got dark, and then just as quietly as they crept up, they left. That night, Pat's dad and uncles stayed up all night by the fire while we were sleeping in the tent. Although we didn't do much sleeping either, mostly just talking about how creeped out we were by those 2 guys, and the fact that they lived in that cabin. Add in the porn, guns, and wigs, and it didn't settle the situation anymore. Eventually we did fall asleep though. In the morning, everything was packed up by the time we woke up, and Pat's dad cut our trip short. We put the tent we were in away and left almost immediately. Most of the trip back was spent talking about how his dad was really freaked out by those guys. Pat and I have talked about it here and there over the years, but years ago we had a major falling out. I never did ask exactly where that cabin was, not that I'd want to go back there anyway. The picturesque views of the lake and surrounding scenery don't exactly trump the uneasiness of the general proximity from those 2 wig-wearing hermits in the cabin. I'm all for camping, just not there. I'm going to start this off by saying I'm a recovering alcoholic. I've been sober for 9 years. That is, without a doubt, my proudest accomplishment. I started getting help during my sophomore year of high school. Looking back, I'm so grateful for the timing. If I'd hit rock bottom later, things would only have gotten worse. My parents actually transferred me to a different school so I could start fresh and meet new people. By the time I turned 18, a few months before graduation, I had already been sober for over 2 years. That was around the time I started aging out of most teen recovery programs. A lot of the counselors I worked with only focused on youth cases, so I had to start finding adult support groups. I grew up in Los Angeles, but not the touristy part. My neighborhood had liquor stores every few blocks and corner shops with thick plexiglass windows. Alcoholism was really common and pretty normalized in my community. So once the teen programs ended for me, I started going to early morning AA meetings on Tuesdays and Thursdays. They were held in a small church near my school. I didn't have first period on those days, so it worked out perfectly. After the meetings, I would usually stay for a couple of extra minutes to write in my journal or just sit in the quiet. One morning, this guy stayed after the meeting and asked me what I was writing. I told him I was journaling. He said he liked the idea and wanted to try it himself. After that, he started sitting next to me at just about every meeting. We would talk a bit afterward. He seemed normal. The guy was about my age. He knew I was about to graduate and asked if I planned to keep coming to that group during the summer. I told him that I wasn't sure yet. I had just gotten a job across town and was looking into meetings closer to where I would be working. I could tell that he didn't exactly love that answer. Sometimes you can just see the disappointment on people's faces. I used to talk a lot in those meetings. I didn't go to just sit in silence. I brought energy into that room. I like to think I helped people feel a little bit better. I think he felt that too, and I think that's why he didn't want me to leave. People have told me that I may talk too much, so maybe I'm just flattering myself and everyone else wanted me to be quiet. But I like to think that I was making a difference. He asked again when I would be switching to a different group. I said I didn't know yet. I told him I planned to keep coming through the end of the school year. I don't remember if I ever told him the name of my school, but I always wore royal blue and gold. He knew I went to a school nearby, just around the corner from the church. It would not have been hard to figure it out the more I think back. Then in the last 2 weeks of senior year, everything got wild. We had senior ditch day, late night hangouts, sleepovers, goodbye parties, you name it. I missed the AA meetings at the church, and then I switched AA groups altogether. At graduation, everything was great, but that guy showed up, and I sure as hell didn't invite him. He didn't know me like that, and we weren't that close, but there he was, smiling at me from the back like it was completely normal. He came over afterward and said he brought me a gift. It was a box of chocolates and a note about how much he would miss me. He said I should drop by the meetings again sometime. I remember uncomfortably saying thank you. I never went back to those meetings. That whole situation was way too weird. I just didn't want to see the guy again, but then he showed up at my new job. I was working the cosmetics counter at a big department store. The cosmetics department actually had its own cash register. The first time he walked by, I noticed him. Then he came back the next day, as well as the day after that. He never spoke or asked for help. He just wandered around near my station looking over at me like, again, this was no big deal. It was clear that he wasn't exactly trying to be subtle about it either. Eventually I told one of my coworkers. the type of woman who doesn't play around. She walked right up to him and asked what he thought he was doing. She called this man out in front of everybody in the store. She said she knew exactly why he was there, and that it was creepy and toxic. A few shoppers turned around to see what exactly was going on. His face turned bright red, and he walked away without saying anything. We told our manager afterward. The manager was glad we spoke up, but reminded us to let her know right away next time. There was no next time though, since that guy never came back. I haven't seen him since. Hopefully he got bored trying to follow me around and moved on. I don't really care to find out what it was that he wanted. To those of you in the comments, thank you for the congratulations on 9 years sober. It means a lot, even just hearing it from strangers. The thing about AA is that you can get out what you put in if you're open to it. There's a lot of good that comes from knowing you're not alone in the struggles, that a lot of strong people have the same issues that you're facing. It's humanizing, humbling, and there's a lot of vulnerability that comes from putting oneself out there. But relating that back to my own story, that doesn't mean that I want to be friends with everyone I share a meeting with. Maybe that's all this guy wanted. Okay, that's human too. But showing up at a graduation that I didn't invite you to, staking out the job that I didn't actually give you the details about, those things are sketchy at best, and you can't just assume that people are cool with someone infiltrating their life like that. It sends a type of message, one that says that something here just isn't right.